and has expressed its appreciation to the members of the previous board for their service. The chairman of the new JADCO board is the Honorable R. Danny Williams, businessman. The other members of the board are Dr. Winston Isle, Gary Peart, Deborah Martin, the Honorable Dennis Layla, Dr. Thelma Nelson, Anthony Lawrence, Dr. Patricia Honus, Carmen Tiplin, Reverend Devon Dick, and two official members, Jacqueline Lynn Stewart from the OPM and JADCO's Executive Director. The Jamaica Anti-Doping Commission was established under the Anti-Doping in Sport Act in 2008. As you know, it is charged with facilitating the control and prevention of doping in sports and to implement programs and policies, including information and education programs aimed at educating athletes, support personnel, parents, the media, and the general public about doping in sport. The new JADCO board will serve for 3 years, from January 1, 2014 to December 31, 2016. Prime Minister Portia Simpson Miller has assigned additional responsibilities to State Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, the Honorable Luther Buchanan. In keeping with the renewed thrust of the government on rural development and the establishment of a rural development task force within the OPM, Minister Buchanan has taken on additional duties with respect to rural healthcare infrastructure. The Ministry of Health has responsibility for over 300 rural healthcare centers, all at differing levels as far as the quality of infrastructure is concerned. Along with his additional duties, Minister Buchanan will provide leadership and oversight to ensure improved infrastructure exists for the delivery of rural health care throughout these centers and other facilities. Prime Minister the Most Honorable Portia Simpson Miller will be paying an official visit to Cuba next week, having accepted an invitation from the Cuban President Raul Castro. The Prime Minister will engage in discussions on international and regional issues, as well as bilateral talks on possible areas of increased cooperation. They will also discuss the upcoming 5th CARICOM Cuba Summit, which will take place later this year. And while in Cuba, the Prime Minister will lead Jamaica's delegation to the 2nd Summit of the Heads of State and Government of the Community of Latin America and the Caribbean States, CELAC. The summit will take place in Havana between January 28 and 29. The 2nd Summit of Heads of State and Government of the Community of Latin America and the Caribbean States is under the theme, The Struggle Against Hunger, Poverty, and the Inequalities in Latin America and the Caribbean. It is expected to adopt the Declaration of Havana. The leaders will explore issues of intra-regional trade, sustainable development, science and technology, climate change, natural disasters, transportation, and social development, among other issues. And we have with us this morning the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Ambassador Paul Robotham, and he can answer any questions you may have on CELAC and the official visit. The matter of crime prevention and the safety and security of our nation are matters we take very seriously. Over the last 2 years, this administration has increased spending, enacted legislation, and put in place measures to increase the safety and the security of our people. We have with us Minister Peter Bunting this morning, and he will give us an update. And on Tuesday, Minister Ronald Thwaites, who came in at the right moment, released a study which made links between poorly performing schools and persons in the penal system. That report has caused some unease, and this morning the Minister will answer your questions. First, I turn to Minister Bunting, who will give us an update. Minister?
Thank you very much, Minister. Good morning, everyone. The 2013 calendar year ended with 1,197 murders versus 1,099 recorded for 2012, or a disappointing increase of 9%. For the first half of 2013, the figures were continuing the downward trend experienced since May 2010. However, in the third quarter, the number of murders spiked to almost 4 per day. This increase was attributed to a number of factors, including the release of certain gang leaders from incarceration, an increase in the number of murders during the course of robberies, and an increase in the drug and firearm trafficking trade. There were some positives in the statistics, however, as every other major category of crime was down. Shooting by 1%, rape down by 16%, and aggravated assault by 14%. Accusatory crimes were also significantly down. Using the public health approach to describe our response to the violence epidemic, we are 1. Interrupting the transmission of violence, 2. Preventing future spread of violence, and critically 3. Changing the group norms towards more socially acceptable behaviors. As a violence interruption strategy, the JCF launched Operation Resilience at the beginning of October 2013 and conducted some 346 anti-gang operations, made 361 arrests, and recorded a record number of 201 firearms recovered in the fourth quarter of 2013 as a response to the earlier spike. We began to see an encouraging moderation in the rate of murders in November 2013, and since mid-December, there has been a further reduction in the murder rate to approximately 2.5 per day, which is a 34% decline from what we were experiencing during the third quarter spike. So crime is not spiraling out of control, as is the standard comment I hear from in the media. It continues, of course, to be a serious challenge. To prevent future spread, the second step in the strategy, we have been building capacity by providing increased resources to the JCF. With more than 2,100 recruits added to the force in the 2-year period 2012 and 2013, and over $1 billion in investments in vehicles to increase the mobility of the force for the same period, which is more than 3 times the amount spent in the prior 2 years. We are building the investigative capacity of the Major Organized Crime and Anti-Corruption Task Force, MOCA, which is charged to take the profit out of crime. Last year alone, over $1.3 billion in cash and assets was detained by MOCA and FID. Significant improvements have been made in our forensic capabilities. We have doubled the output of forensic certificates over the last 2 years and eliminated the backlog of postmortems. We have been active in passing critical legislation. Parliament has passed the Law Reform Fraudulent Transactions Special Provisions Act, and I would note here that every case that has been concluded so far has resulted in convictions. It has strengthened the Proceeds of Crime Act and the Trafficking in Persons Act, and will also shortly pass the Anti-Gang Bill. We are also expecting the final draft of the DNA Bill from the Chief Parliamentary Counsel's office this month. But the third and most critical step to combating an epidemic has to do with reshaping the norms of the society, or put another way, reversing the subculture of violence that has crippled our society over many decades. The recently introduced Unite for Change initiative is the principal vehicle through which our efforts to reshape the cultural norms will be coordinated. With a multi-sectoral and multidisciplinary approach, Unite for Change will coordinate a national movement, a national violence prevention movement, galvanizing the support of key government ministries, agencies, and departments, the private sector, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, NGOs, and indeed all well-thinking Jamaicans. The Ministry of Education has been very responsive to the initiative and has already this week announced a preventative initiative in schools to help ameliorate Jamaica's crime and violence problem. The National Forum on Youth Violence Prevention, which will be held on January 30th, next week Thursday, at the Jamaica Conference Center, will be the formal launch of the Unite for Change initiative. The forum will create awareness, build social capacity, share best practice, and drive action by Jamaicans from all walks of life to create a safer and gentler society. Finally, one of the group norms that we must change is the level of police fatal shootings. On Wednesday afternoon, Commissioner Terence Williams briefed me on the Independent Commission of Investigations, INDECOM's investigation into a number of alleged murders over a period of years in the Clarendon Police Division. I have issued directives to the Commissioner of Police to take immediate steps to address compliance with the JCF's use of force policy and the INDECOM Act, as well as to institute new measures to improve accountability. The investigation of these alleged extrajudicial killings are at a sensitive stage, and I am therefore not able to say any more on this specific issue at this time. However, the administration views the issue of extrajudicial killings with the gravest concern and is committed to the police being accountable for their actions, and that every use of lethal force must be independently investigated, explained, and justified. In the interim, I have instructed the Commissioner of Police to complete and promulgate in the JCF's force orders within the next few weeks protocols with INDECOM to address the following: the arrest policy, the incident scene preservation, the immediate notification of INDECOM whenever there are shootings, the handling of the ballistic submissions, sharing of the outcomes of administrative reviews, ensuring the independence of officer accounts, that's officers who are involved in incidents, and submissions of officer statements. The Ministry of National Security will also be implementing a project to deploy body-worn cameras for select JCF units. This is scheduled to commence rollout in the second half of this year. The purpose of this project is to, 1, improve the collection of evidence of criminal activity in an effort to prosecute and reduce such activity. 2, to improve the transparency of JCF activities when interacting with the public. 3, to encourage JCF officers to act in accordance with the force's professional standards, to include the appropriate use of force when applied. And 4thly, to create a record to protect JCF officers from unfair allegations of violations of JCF professional standards. The government of Jamaica is committed to reducing the level of crime and violence that has taken a terrible toll on this nation. As part of this commitment, we will be taking all necessary steps to ensure that the JCF becomes one of the most trusted and respected institutions in Jamaica. We continue to support the work of INDECOM and pledge the cooperation of the Ministry of National Security, its departments and agencies in INDECOM's investigations. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Minister Wicks.
Good morning, everyone. The Ministry of Education wants to collaborate with the Unite for Change project. It is an instance of joined-up government, and it is essential that we recognize the origins of deviant behavior in Jamaica. I myself have concerns, as every Jamaican will, as to the very stern measures which from time to time have to be introduced in order to control crime. If all we do is to control crime following Minister Bunting's important analysis, we will not solve the problem. Criminals are not born, they are formed. Often by neglect, often because of poor socialization. And the major positive environments in the formative process of our family, sometimes church, but less and less so, regretfully, and certainly the school. We in Jamaica are very fortunate. Unlike many nations which are more wealthy than ours, there is a place in school for every child. Every Jamaican child goes to school at some time in their life. And therefore, there is no other institution with such potential for positive socialization. Having regard also to the weak nature of our family structure and also to the many varied challenges of our communities, all of which are very important, need to be dealt with. But surely we must start where we have a particular handle and opportunity, and that is at the school. In the schools, law-abiding habits need to be expressly connected with the school experience, and everyone connected with the school experience must be held accountable. No one could ever state that it is the purview of teachers alone. It is not, or of principals. It involves a combination of home, community, and school. But the school is the locus. It is the place where the greatest degree of attention, presence, resources, including that, where necessary and appropriate, of the security forces, can coalesce. And that was the basis of the ministry putting forward a preventive initiative in schools to ameliorate Jamaica's crime problem. As far as I know, nothing has ever been done of that nature before. The study, which was clearly entitled a Education and Crime, Evidence from Prison Inmates in Jamaica, Report 2012 by the Jamaica Constabulary Force, Research, Planning and Legal Services Department, was shown to me by the minister, and it was used, has been used, and should be used as a hook for us to discuss the therapies, the ways forward, to use the school and the broader community as a means for socializing our young people towards wholesome behavior, towards avoiding gang contact, and towards achieving their best ambitions, both socially and academically. The emphasis has been placed upon the identification by that research study from the police of a number of schools where there have been a graduation, in some respects of, in some senses of their students, into the criminal subculture. The study, in fact, goes much further than that. The study identifies a number of communities from which many long-serving criminals come from. It also indicates something to me which is of prime importance, is that the large majority of those students come from weak families, from instances where fathers are absent, or where there have been unsatisfactory relationships between mothers and fathers, which have been transmitted into children's attitude towards themselves and towards their school experience. The evidence or the findings of this study are by no means being released for the first time. They have been in the public domain for some time, though not noticed. And secondly, the Ministry of Education, through its National Education Inspectorate, has identified some 50-odd schools, including those where there are significant social deficiencies, which unfortunately are cramping education. Teachers sometimes have to spend 20-25 minutes out of a class simply restoring order because of the social challenges and other challenges of children. This is not to place scores of blame on anyone. It is simply to indicate those where the greatest help is necessary. There has been a change in philosophy in how we deal with education in the last 2 years, consistent with the position of this government. While it has been true in the past that we gave accolades and recognition to those who do very well, and that is good. Yes? Those who succeed should be cherished. But we believe that the best attention, the strongest deposit of resources should be made available to those who are weakest, and particularly where elements of that weakness are in fact causing great national distress. And therefore we welcome and see as absolutely necessary the connection between the Ministry of National Security's efforts and our own. And it is not confined to education, because the therapies, which are the main point of the ministry paper that I laid on Tuesday, will involve the Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Labor and Social Security, the Ministry of Health, and the Ministry of Youth and Culture. And I'm inviting this morning the entire Jamaican community through the media to look very carefully and to see how they can help, each of us in our own way can help to create what is called a community of care around each school. And particularly among those schools, many of whom are doing very much better now than they were before, many of whom still require, all of whom still require considerable assistance. And I dare say that the measures that we are talking about apply to every one of the 1,100 public schools in Jamaica, from those rated highest to those lowest. And the singling out of some by that study or by the NEI report, which is equally public, is not meant to shame anybody. It is not meant to set the duppy of public opprobrium on anyone, but to indicate where we ought, in a spirit of care and community, to place the greatest effort. What is that greatest effort? First of all, we need to do what we have never done before, to recognize that many behavioral problems are in fact pathologies and require clinical assistance if once they are properly diagnosed. And therefore the ministry is pledging that beginning next month we will begin a process of identification, of diagnosis of those children whenever they are brought to our attention, whenever we can go to the schools and identify them, who have clearly behavioral and other dysfunctions. In some cases it may mean providing a pair of eyeglasses or a lunch money or a breakfast. In some cases it means dealing with those who are scarred by violence in their community. It may mean to others those who are suffering from the emotional fracture of having no effective father or mother or both. Yes. It is true to say that these are not problems that are generated or solvable by the school. They involve a larger cultural change in this society that for too long we have hesitated to identify, let alone to deal with sufficient resources, and more so with sufficient resolve. We continue to give our little children some of the stimuli which do not inure to their best education or their wholesome behavior. We do not always teach them to prize themselves as God has made them, and to develop their aptitudes according to how nature has in fact endowed them. And so what we will be doing is administering tests to determine the social and emotional state of at-risk students, beginning in the first grade and also doing at that tempestuous stage of adulthood, which is usually at grade 8 and grade 9. Why have we chosen that second stage? Because that is the stage where a number of dropouts take place. And what we do know from the police study and from our own experience is that the dropouts, whether it is because of premature pregnancy, because of the fact that there's no money to come to school, or because fractious behavior has led to exclusion, or sheer boredom, that is the cohort that are more likely to create social difficulties later on in life. We will enhance, as we announced in June, and are now well on the way to do, enhance the therapeutic opportunities for children in this situation, with the continuation of the development of care centers throughout the island. In addition, the curriculum of teacher training institutions is going to be modified because teachers have been put in an invidious position by not being really exposed to some of the behavior tendencies that they are likely to have to deal with in class. And then we blame them when they are not to be blamed because they do not have the skills necessary to deal with some of the social maladaptations. Similarly, the College of Educational Leadership, which is now retraining principals in service and those who will become principals, is going to have the issue of correcting maladaptive behavior as a very important aspect of that training. Further, because I must hurry, is that the curriculum in schools, the attention and the time given to family life education, to personal development, to civics, is going to be increased in our schools. It has been the kind of what left of the situation. Journalists will remember that it was only in a year and a half ago that we reintroduced civics from its banishment that had taken place in previous years. And therefore students will have much more opportunity to be educated formally as well as all of the informal measures we are speaking about. Similarly, funds have been allocated for the intensification of uniform groups, sports groups, and creative opportunities in the schools. It won't happen at one time, but to the extent that it is advancing, and some 200 new groups have been formed in 2013, yes, it will help to reform those with negative tendencies. And finally, and there may be a much longer list that members of the public and behaviorists and others can add to this, but we feel it is extremely important to have young people exposed to members of the police force and the army in a constructive way, in a way that is not threatening, but in a way that encourages them to understand that some of the disciplines of the security forces, order, cooperation, teamwork, healthy competitiveness, are exercises that ought to be inculcated from the earliest stages possible. These are the hopes that the Ministry of Education, more than hopes, these are the plans that we are insisting must begin this year and must become permanent part of the school experience. It will include parents. I challenge this morning once again the members of every church to come out of their pews, the members of the service clubs to come away from their constructive and happy engagement and come into the school and offer the mentoring that is necessary, especially in those schools which, because of socioeconomic conditions external to them and also because of weaknesses within the schools, to come and assist, not just with prayer or to watch a football match, but that too, but to engage in befriending young people who in the nature of our society have no other option. It is in this regard that we have singled out some, or some have been singled out, where special attention is needed. These are not mantles of disgrace. These should produce no tears, but rather should be occasions for us to recognize and call for help, because the help is available, and the help must come from the entire community if we are serious about allaying the scourge of crime. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Thwaites. And we now open the floor for questions. Keisha Anslade.
This is for Minister Thwaites. It has been said that the study is outdated. It's a 2012 study.
It was clearly identified, Ms. Lade, for what it was done, when it was done, what it referred to, and in schools where there have been, and there are many, I hope, where there have been considerable improvement, I commend to them the slogan of your own station, "Look at us now."
If I could just add to that, you know, I've been observing Minister Thwaites, the almost majoring in the minors, in the attention, focusing on the JCF study, which really was quite peripheral to the point you were making. The first of all, I don't think anything there is inconsistent with a whole body of authoritative studies by academic and health professionals. It certainly is consistent. But the central theme is that the school provides a critical opportunity for intervention, for resocialization, for diversion from the criminal gang future for these young people, in particular young men. And that is the point. I mean, if you just remove the reference to that study from the ministry paper and Minister Thwaite's presentation in Parliament, it takes nothing from it except the distraction that seemed to have possessed certain commentators in the media. But I really ask you, don't be diverted to that. Look at the central opportunity which he has pointed to, not just for the Ministry of Education, but for the society. And I think we would be well served to focus on that opportunity.
Janella? Janella?
Janella, Press News, TVJ News. Minister, but there were some schools that seem to have taken offense that, you know, their names, the school's names was called in that report in Parliament on Tuesday. They've taken offense that you have called them out, so to speak.
I was not the author of the study, but the names were called. There is no intention to disgrace anyone. There is an intention to identify. I take it that certainly the authors of the study, and certainly the Minister of Education, what we intended to do was to point to those to point to those schools as instances where particular assistance and help would be needed and available. To say that there is that there has been a problem or is a problem is not to invite disgrace. It is if you call schools failing schools and leave it at that, perhaps so, that is wrong. Yes, but if you do, if they are named and there is a clear program stated before any naming of what you are going to do, what we all must try and do, Janella, in order to improve the situation, I pray that is therapeutic. We intend to hurt nobody. How could it be possibly the intention of the Ministry of Education to demean the character or the repute of any of its own schools? We are responsible for them and they to us.
Darren Luton.
Good morning. Minister Thwaite, if you may respond to the question having to do with the fact that a lot of the persons identified in the study have been incarcerated for some time, so maybe because, and you touched on it earlier, but if you could go further, because situations have changed at those schools, on what basis are you designing intervention to go into those areas where perhaps the situation no longer exists?
Well, I think it would be very good for us for those schools and for ourselves to interact to find out if if pre-existing conditions continue, and could we stop the illusion that we seem to labor onto? Many schools, traditional and non-traditional, primary and high schools, are doing extremely important work in terms of resocialization. But every school, I hesitate to mention the names, but from Campion and Immaculate and Ardennes and everyone to those rated last in that flawed study that was out some time ago, every one of us have that problem. There are grave social deficiencies that our society is throwing up in the schools all around. And therefore, before we exempt ourselves, let us open ourselves to benefit as much as possible. And where in fact we have become beacons of good conduct, of best example, could we, rather than decrying the effort, share with others?
May I follow up on that then, Minister? Being that you say a lot of these schools may have dealt with some of the problems or would have embarked on resocialization thus far, would you be revisiting the list that you have in terms of the interventions that you have had? Maybe because they are no longer at the top per se in terms of the 18 that has been listed?
Could I remind you of Minister Bunting's injunction in his remark that we mustn't really major in the minors, and the central thing is to open in the education system. May I finish? What is the major point is the therapy, may it please you, that we are offering as never before to deal with the massive and island-wide problem of deviance in schools. And for those who are doing well, let us celebrate them. This morning I was happy to be at the introduction of STEM in high schools function at Hart Trust, and was very pleased to note the extraordinary strength in robotics that the Jamaica College Robotics Club has done. And immediately we offer them the financial support that will be necessary to carry it further, to offer to other schools. Can we understand that what we need to do is to take our best examples, if we need, and to help those who need that help? Yes? As far as revising a particular list, I didn't create that list. Yes? And if the problem has been overtaken there, then praise God.
One last thing to you, Minister. In grow where you are planted, that's why you have said, how do you square that now going forward with the, and you realize perhaps you might need to do, how do you square that with the telling people to go to these institutions now that you are though you are trying to intervene into them, make interventions into these schools? How do you square that with the grow where you are planted, where people may be reluctant to send their children to these schools because they fear that they will be producing criminals?
First of all, I would ask them to understand fully what the study that the police did and that we attached to our ministry paper really says. And secondly, I wish to assure them that the schools that their children would be going to are not going to remain static. The work at Holy Trinity High School, for example, may I invite your particular attention there? I happen to know much about it. Yes? Holy Trinity was one of those named in this study. Holy Trinity was called a failing school by somebody else. Go to Holy Trinity now and see the improved leadership, the improved infrastructure, the improved deportment, the coming together of members of the private sector to help that school. And I think any parent who did that would be able to forswear the prejudice which inspires so many, and be glad if their student could go there.
One of the teachers interviewed last night about the issue pointed to the fact that it is 20 former students out of a inmate population of 800 where the students have become inmates. She suggested that statistically 2.5% it is insignificant, so no proper planning for intervention can be done. How do you respond to that?
Well, I don't think that I see a non sequitur there, because a particular statistical index is asserted would not mean that you can't plan for proper intervention. And I want to make the point, you know, we are pulling the wool over our eyes if we fail to understand that all schools provide useful matrices for intervention, and that most, if not all, schools need it. So, I'm sorry, I couldn't respond anymore.
And if there are 1,100 public schools, and you know a few are overrepresented, I think that was the only, you know, really the point. I mean, to say whether it was accurate, you know, or precisely or not, you know, I think we're missing the point. And the other point, Minister Tuet said that this selection of schools is not based solely on this report by the GSF. It's based on the work of the Inspectorate Division of the Ministry of Education.
The issue of the cameras, could you explain a little bit more how that will work in terms of where they will be placed? Are they going to be placed in vehicles? What's going to happen with that? And another thing, how are you going to monitor that to ensure that when you look at the footage, you don't see half of it missing or something like that happening?
No, the idea of body-worn cameras is that they either go on the chest of the officer, if it is an officer who is wearing a helmet or a fairly hard hat, Or as technology improves, they now have the Google Glass version of it, where you essentially wear something like just looking like a pair of glasses. So we're looking at a body worn. We're having a consultant coming out within the next month to advise us on the selection, because there are various versions, some that record in device, some which transmit from the device back to a patrol vehicle, and some which transmit back to a central control over the 3G or 4G, whatever as the case may be, network. So there are a number of options. Usually the devices have to be turned on by the officer because they have limited battery life. They can't run 24/7. But in introducing them, the protocol is that once you go on operation, you would have to switch it on. And therefore, if you didn't switch it on, then that by itself would be a disciplinary matter.
Doreen?
We'll introduce it as a pilot, and as we learn from the pilot, then its deployment would be increased. Obviously not to all 14,000 members of the GSF, but those who participate in the planned operations, particularly where you anticipate they may come into contact with armed men, those units would be the ones that you would prioritize. We are in the planning stage. We have a consultant coming out within the next month. They will advise in terms of the size of the pilot, but the pilot would, perhaps take the operational unit in a particular police division and pilot it at one division level, and then based on the results of the pilot, you would deploy it. You begin the wider rollout.
Another one from me, the lottery scam big law. Significant results there in terms of convictions. What lessons can you take from that and apply it to other such legislation that you're going forward with? And I'm wondering if the absence of jury trial in this may be a result, resulting in the convictions we are seeing.
Well, you've correctly observed one of the features of the lottery scam law. There's been a number of challenges to do with jurors and empaneling jurors, and we've talked about, magistrates have talked about it, etc., which is one of the reasons why in much of the new legislation it provides for a single judge sitting alone. But that is only one element why I think this is successful. The second, it's a modern law. It recognizes new technology, new techniques, makes provision for things like identity theft, which was not provided for in other legislation. A lot of times the police are battling criminals using very modern technology and modern communication techniques, for example, with laws that were designed a century ago and didn't anticipate the methodologies that are being used today. So there is a wider lesson to be learned in that we have to look at a lot of our, what I would call, base legislation, and and go through a whole process of legal reform, updating them, etc. I'll just give you one example. When we were discussing the anti-gang bill in Parliament, a particular option was the controversial clause 15, was to take it out of the anti-gang bill and amend the Obscene Publications Act and put it in there, which already treats with things like inciting people to violence and that sort of thing. But when we looked at the act, it was so dated, and by the way, the maximum penalty was $40. The maximum fine that you could charge under the act was $40. We realized that it didn't make sense, even though that might have been the ideal place. But you'd first have to go through a process of reform of that piece of legislation before you amend it through the anti-gang bill. So you know, there's a whole set of law reform issues that I know Minister Golding is taking on, but which just is going to take a Herculean effort if we're going to get it done within any relatively short period of time.
So, you still believe you can achieve the target of 12 murders per 100,000 in the population by 2016?
Look, that was an aspirational goal. It was an aggressive goal that the GSF had set itself internally, that I shared with the public. The important thing is not whether you make that exact target or not. The important thing is, one, we realize how far we have to go, and that we're not going to get there by incrementalism. And the second thing is for us to start making the sort of paradigm shifting interventions like Unite for Change, which is going to get us there or anywhere near there, you know, in the medium term.
Minister Bunting, Kayla Wright from News Talk 93 FM. There are allegations that you reacted too quickly in reducing the importance of extortion, given the recent police report of extortions and persons, you know, kicking people out of their houses and forcing them to rent it back. What is the ministry doing now to reduce these cases of extortion?
I'm going to let the commissioner respond to that question and go, we don't handle the operational side of it. But I would just say that my response merely pointed out that, you know, caution. You know, I know we are in an adversarial political environment, but let us not use the issue of crime and violence as one which we try and use to panic the public and raise their anxiety unnecessarily. There was no evidence before the police, who have a massive intelligence organization, to suggest that there was any spiraling extortion problem. Of course we have a problem of extortion, we have had for a long time, but the suggestion that it was spiraling out of control is what my response was saying. After consultation with the commissioner, they had no evidence to support that. If the opposition spokesman has evidence, let him bring it forward and share with the police.
Yes, and in addition to that, in relation to the question about what we're doing to deal with extortion, we have an anti-extortion strategy, and we have been deploying operatives undercover to detect the crime and arrest the perpetrators, because the victims are always fearful to report. In fact, those who engage in extortion activities actually create the conditions of fear, so that when they go and make these extortion demands, people will pay without any intention of reporting to the police. But we have found a way to get around that, which we won't discuss in details here, but to say that we have been able to make arrests, we intend to make more, and this very weekend we are coming out with a publication to the general public, just advising about the extortion approaches, the forms in which they come, and all the opportunities which are available for it to be reported to us in confidence without any lead back to the source. In the case of the Rockford community, extortion is not new to that community. It's been around for a long time. It has been the source of violence there. But this past week, we did put out a public release just advising the public as to the aggressiveness of the extortionists in that community, and that they're actually turning on householders. But it doesn't mean that the problem is exploding all over the country. We have managed to contain it, as we have been able to curtail criminal gang activities in many parts of the country.
We're going to take 3 more questions. One.
That don't count.
After we're done with our guest, I can ask you a question.
Ask me.
Okay, let me go to the commissioner first, since we're on crime. Commissioner Ellington, can you give us an update in terms of the investigation last bill? I think the incident happened 2 weeks ago with the Chinese nationals. Do you have any updates on that case?
Sure. In fact, I'm happy you asked, because we have been seeing a trend in recent years where there are criminal elements. These are gangs, and they are well organized, and they have been targeting the Chinese community. They target them in a number of ways. Shakedowns around immigration issues and work permit issues. Shakedowns around counterfeit or contraband imports, some of them pretending to be policemen and customs officers. And then there is a set that their MO is to rob the Chinese. And we have arrested these individuals over and over. In the last major robbery in the Old Pastures areas, these are individuals who were arrested previously, and we have been able to rearrest some of them. We have a difficulty in continuing the investigations against these individuals because of reluctance of some victims to come forward to identification periods and to come to court. And so what we're trying to do is to proceed against them by laying the charges that we can carry forward without the actual victims being present as witnesses. That has, serious limitations. Maybe that is one of the reasons why the robbers think they can prey on this particularly vulnerable group. But our investigations are progressing very well, and we hope at some stage to be able to get all of these individuals with evidence so that we can get them behind bars and bring some relief to this vulnerable community.
Minister, your time. Can you give us an update as to what is happening at the Ministry of Youth and Culture? It has been reported that a new PS is being sought. This after the PS, Sydney Bartley, was only appointed last week. Can you give us an idea as to what exactly is going on there?
I would not wish to speak on that now. I am not aware that a new PS is appointed or is being appointed. It's a matter for the Public Service Commission.
You confirm, therefore, that the PS, the current PS, Sydney Bartley, has been sent on early retirement?
It's a matter, again, for the Public Service Commission. I would suggest that you direct that question to the public. I don't know.
But is there a PS there? Is there a PS operating there?
I can check and find out for you. Any other question? One final?
Minister Thwaites, yes. Last year you had promised a policy as it relates to school transfer dealing with sports, student athletes. Can you tell us what's the situation with that?
We've worked as closely as possible with the Inter-Secondary School Sports Association to develop this. The cooperation has been intermittent, and a final draft is now ready, and I trust that before champs we will be able to promulgate this after the consent of cabinet. We're really hoping that we can establish some principles. Transfers will happen in between schools from time to time, but they should first and foremost be for the benefit of the students' academic progress and not involve the commodification of school children, which is what we have noticed and has been alleged even more than we can prove in many instances. That's the direction we're going in, to lay down those guidelines, and we would much rather that it be consensual, coming from the schools themselves, rather than by some edict from government.
All right, thank you very, very much. And we won't be having any briefing next week because we will not have a cabinet sitting on Monday because the Prime Minister is traveling on official business to Cuba. We want to thank our guests, Ambassador, Mr. Shaw, Commissioner, and my two colleague ministers for joining us. We wish you a very good rest of the week. Thank you very, very much.